In the early hours of 9 April 2022, on a quiet stretch of highway in General Escobedo, Nuevo Leon, Mexico, an 18-year-old girl stepped out of a car, stood alone in the darkness, and was never seen alive again. Her name was Debani Escobar, a law student and the deeply loved only daughter of a family from Monterrey. The last person known to have seen her alive was the driver who had taken her away from a party. Before driving off, he took a photograph of her standing alone by the roadside, illuminated only by the headlights, with darkness stretching out behind her. That photograph would become the final known image of Debani alive. For the next 13 days, the search never stopped. Her parents refused to give up, while thousands of people across Mexico joined the effort, searching every possible area in the hope of bringing her home. Then her body was discovered inside an underground water cistern at a roadside motel, a property that had already been searched not once, but multiple times during the investigation. What turned Debani's case into one of the most haunting and controversial investigations in modern Mexican history was what followed. 3 separate autopsies produced 3 completely different conclusions about the cause of her death. Years later, no one has ever been formally charged with directly causing Debani's death. This is not a story with a clear ending. It is the search for the truth behind one of the most disputed and heartbreaking cases in modern Mexico. A truth that, even today, seems to remain hidden in the darkness beneath that underground water tank. Before we begin, if you'd like to watch more in-depth investigations into some of the world's most shocking true crime cases, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a future documentary. Debani Susana Escobar Bazaldua was born on 4 September 2003 and was the adopted daughter of Mario Escobar and Dolores Bazaldua, a couple living in Monterrey, the capital of Nuevo Leon in northern Mexico. From the day she entered their lives, she was raised with unconditional love and affection. To her parents, Debani was the greatest gift they had ever received. As she grew older, Debani chose to study law, hoping one day to become a solicitor. Friends and relatives described her as an outgoing, energetic young woman who enjoyed life and remained especially close to the group of friends she had known since secondary school. Monterrey, together with neighboring municipalities such as General Escobedo and General Terán, is one of northern Mexico's fastest-growing metropolitan regions, home to thousands of university students and young professionals. The area is well known for its vibrant nightlife, filled with parties, clubs, and late-night social gatherings. Yet beneath that lively atmosphere lay a far more troubling reality. In recent years, the region had become increasingly affected by a growing crisis of women disappearing or being killed. According to official figures, Mexico recorded 1,015 cases of femicide in 2021, the legal term used for the gender-based killing of women. During the same period, thousands of women were reported missing nationwide, making women's safety one of the country's most urgent and deeply debated social issues. On the evening of 8 April 2022, Debani attended a party with a group of friends in General Terán. By every account from those who were there, it was an ordinary gathering. Nothing unusual or alarming was reported throughout the night. When it was time to head home, the group arranged transport through a popular ride-hailing app widely used in Mexico. Debani climbed into the vehicle with several friends for the journey back towards Monterrey, a trip that seemed no different from countless others made every night across the country's major cities. No one at the party could have imagined that only a few hours later, that routine journey home would take a devastating turn, one that, even today, leaves investigators with more questions than answers. Like countless other parents that evening, Debani's mother and father had no reason to fear for their daughter's safety. As far as they knew, she was simply making her way home after enjoying a night out with friends, a familiar, reassuring thought that would become the last time they believed she was safely on her way back. It was that seemingly uneventful period between leaving the party and arriving home that would later become the central focus of an investigation spanning years, a gap in the timeline that, to this day, has never been fully explained. According to the driver's later statement, the journey began with Debani and her group of friends all traveling together. One by one, the vehicle stopped to drop each passenger at their home until Debani was the only person left in the car, continuing towards her house in Monterrey. During the drive, the driver later told the media that a tense exchange took place between the two of them. He claimed he had intended to take Debani all the way home, but that she suddenly insisted on getting out of the vehicle along the way in General Escobedo, a location well away from her home, on a quiet stretch of highway in the early hours of the morning. This remains one of the most disputed moments in the entire case. Why would Debani choose to get out of the car in an unfamiliar place at a time when the roads were largely deserted? The only explanation ever presented to the public came from one person alone, the driver himself. Before driving away, the driver used his mobile phone to take a photograph of Debani standing alone beside the road. When that image was later released, It became one of the defining photographs of the case, sparking widespread public debate and raising countless questions about why he had chosen to take it in the first place. Investigators later established that, after being left there, Debanhi appeared to make attempts to seek help. CCTV footage from a nearby transport company captured what authorities believe was Debanhi approaching the property's entrance, seemingly trying to get assistance in the middle of the night. No one at the premises appeared to respond to her. At least, that is what the available CCTV footage showed before she disappeared completely from every known camera covering the area. As the hours passed without any contact from their daughter, Debanhi's parents became increasingly alarmed. Phone calls went unanswered. Text messages received no reply. With each passing hour, a frightening picture began to emerge, one that no parent ever wants to face. By the morning of 9 April, after every attempt to reach her had been met with silence, Mario Escobar and Dolores Basaldua knew they could not wait any longer. They began contacting Debanhi's friends, trying to reconstruct every step of her final known movements from the previous night, a process that, only hours later, would lead them to formally report their daughter missing. For a family as close as theirs, Debanhi disappearing without responding to a single call or message for so many hours was completely out of character. To them, this was not a simple delay or a forgotten phone. It was a clear sign that something had gone terribly wrong during a journey home that should have taken less than an hour. No CCTV camera ever captured what truly happened to Debanhi after she left the area near the transport company in the middle of the night. No witness has ever come forward to say they saw her after that moment. The distance between where she was last seen and where her body would eventually be discovered at Nueva Castilla Motel was only a few hundred meters. Yet what happened within that short stretch remains one of the greatest mysteries of the case. As soon as Debanhi was officially reported missing, authorities in Nuevo Leon launched a large-scale search operation. State police, search and rescue teams, and thousands of volunteers from across Mexico converged on General Escobedo, determined not to let her disappearance become another forgotten case, in a state already struggling with a growing number of missing women. Over the next 13 days, investigators pursued multiple lines of inquiry simultaneously. At one point, authorities searched an apartment in the Condominios Constitucion complex, around 17 kilometers from where Debanhi had disappeared, after receiving information suggesting that items connected to her might be found there. However, the search produced no publicly disclosed breakthrough, and any connection between that location and the case has never been fully explained. Public pressure intensified as Debanhi's disappearance spread across social media, drawing attention not only throughout Mexico but also from international news organizations. For many Mexicans, this was no longer just the story of one missing young woman. It became a symbol of a much broader crisis, the constant fear faced by women across the country whenever they ventured out alone at night. The governor of Nuevo Leon, Samuel Garcia, publicly pledged that the state government would commit every available resource to the search, while Debanhi's family continued to appeal directly to the public through television interviews and social media, pleading for any information that might help bring their daughter home. With each passing day, hope became increasingly fragile. Debanhi's mother, Dolores Basaldua, told reporters that she could not bear the thought of returning to a home without her daughter. She vowed that the family would continue searching until they finally had answers, no matter how painful those answers might be. It was during this period of mounting tension, on the 13th day of the search, that an unexpected discovery at a location that had already been searched would completely change the direction of the investigation. Throughout those 13 days, investigators also received countless tips and theories from members of the public. Some led to additional searches at various locations around General Escobedo, but the overwhelming majority produced no meaningful results. As each lead came to nothing, the search grew increasingly frustrating, and the investigation appeared to be slipping further into uncertainty with every passing day. On the evening of 21 April 2022, search teams returned once again to Nueva Castilla Motel, a property located only a short distance from where Debanhi had last been seen 13 days earlier. What immediately drew attention was the fact that the motel had already been searched during the investigation, yet those earlier inspections had produced no significant discoveries. Within the motel grounds was an underground water cistern near the swimming pool, which had reportedly been out of use for several months. It was there that search personnel discovered the body of a young woman. Later that evening, the Nuevo Leon State Prosecutor's Office, Fiscalía General de Justicia, officially confirmed what Debanhi's family and much of Mexico had desperately hoped would not be true. The body recovered from the cistern was identified as Debanhi Escobar, bringing an end to 13 days of searching. The announcement spread across Mexico within hours. Social media was flooded with tributes, photographs, and messages of condolence. For many people, the fear that had been building throughout nearly 2 weeks of uncertainty had finally become the heartbreaking reality they had dreaded most. Mexico's president at the time, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, also addressed the case publicly, acknowledging that it had, quite understandably, caused enormous concern and anxiety across the country. The discovery of Debanhi's body at a location that authorities had reportedly searched before immediately triggered widespread public outrage and suspicion. Many questioned how a site that had already been examined could have failed to reveal the underground water cistern where she was ultimately found. That question would remain one of the most controversial and fiercely debated aspects of the case for years to come. On the night of the discovery, investigators sealed off the entire Nueva Castilla motel complex, preparing the scene for an extensive forensic examination and a detailed crime scene investigation. For the Escobar family, receiving official confirmation marked one of the most devastating moments any parent could endure. 13 days of hope came to an irreversible end. Debani's father, Mario Escobar, would later say that moment changed his life forever, transforming him from a father searching for his missing daughter into a father determined to fight for justice on her behalf for years to come. Women's rights organizations across Mexico quickly demanded accountability from the authorities in Nuevo León, questioning the shortcomings of the initial search operation and calling for a transparent, independent investigation to establish exactly what had happened to Debani during those mysterious 13 days. Once Debani's identity had been officially confirmed, forensic specialists from the Nuevo León State Prosecutor's Office began an extensive examination of the scene surrounding the underground water cistern. The operation was particularly complex. Rather than an open crime scene, investigators were dealing with a subterranean water tank that required specialized equipment to safely recover the body while preserving every possible piece of forensic evidence. The entire Nueva Castilla motel complex, including the swimming pool area and the surrounding guest rooms, remained sealed off for several days. Investigators collected footage from every operational security camera on the property and conducted meticulous searches throughout the motel, looking for any evidence that could explain Debani's presence there during the period she had been missing. One of the most significant developments came from surveillance footage that appeared to show Debani entering the motel grounds alone only hours before investigators believed she died. The governor of Nuevo León publicly presented the footage to Debani's family, confirming that she had entered the property and remained there for several minutes, although no further details were provided about what happened afterwards. The footage immediately deepened the mystery surrounding the case. If Debani had entered the motel on her own, what had brought her there? What was she hoping to do? And, most importantly, what happened during those brief moments inside the property before her body was discovered in the underground water cistern days later? Following the identification of her body, the investigation was formally transferred to the Specialized Prosecutor's Office for Femicide, Fiscalía Especializada en Feminicidios, replacing the missing persons unit that had led the search throughout the previous 13 days. The transfer marked an important turning point, reflecting the authorities' decision to officially investigate the case as a serious criminal matter rather than a missing person inquiry. In the days that followed, investigators widened the scope of their inquiry. Their work extended well beyond the motel grounds, including interviews with every staff member believed to have been working at Nueva Castilla Motel when the events unfolded. For Debani's family, seeing the newly released surveillance footage brought both a measure of hope and even deeper heartbreak. Although the recordings provided another clue, they also became the final known images of their daughter. Even those silent security camera frames reinforced the enormity of their loss while strengthening their determination to demand a thorough investigation that left no question unanswered. At the same time, international media organizations began paying far closer attention to the case. What had started as a local missing person investigation quickly became a story followed around the world, placing growing pressure on the authorities in Nuevo León to provide a clear, transparent explanation of what had truly happened to Debani Escobar. The first post-mortem examination was carried out by the chief medical examiner of Nuevo León shortly after Debani's body was recovered. Its initial findings immediately drew national attention. The official report concluded that the cause of death was a severe head injury. Even more striking was the determination that Debani was still alive when she entered or was placed inside the underground water cistern, based on the reported absence of water in her lungs. That conclusion was met with immediate and forceful criticism from Debani's family, who argued that it appeared to favor the theory of an accidental death rather than fully exploring the possibility that she had been the victim of a deliberate criminal act. As public pressure intensified, the Escobar family requested an independent forensic examination. The second autopsy reached a dramatically different conclusion. The independent forensic experts reported evidence suggesting that Debani had been sexually assaulted before her death, a finding that directly contradicted the official report issued by the state authorities. The stark contradiction between the two examinations left the Mexican public deeply unsettled and raised serious questions about the transparency and reliability of the original investigation conducted by officials in Nuevo León. Amid growing controversy, authorities authorized the exhumation of Debunhy's body so that a third post-mortem examination could be performed. This time, the examination was conducted by forensic specialists from Mexico City under the supervision of Dr. Felipe Takayashi, head of the capital's forensic medical service. When the third report was released, it presented yet another conclusion, one that differed from both previous examinations. According to the Mexico City forensic team, Debunhy's cause of death was asphyxia caused by an obstruction of the airway, although the report did not specify exactly what had caused that obstruction. The third examination also found no evidence of sexual assault, directly contradicting the findings of the family's independent forensic experts. 3 separate post-mortem examinations, 3 different forensic teams, 3 conflicting conclusions reached within just a few months. Such a situation is virtually unprecedented in modern Mexican criminal investigations. For Debunhy's family, these contradictions represented far more than a technical disagreement between forensic specialists. To them, they reflected profound weaknesses in the investigative system itself and reinforced their belief that the truth about their daughter's death remained unresolved. After reviewing the findings of the third examination, Debunhy's father, Mario Escobar, told reporters that he remained convinced his daughter had been murdered, even though the official forensic report stopped short of reaching that conclusion. The inconsistencies between the 3 forensic reports also became the subject of extensive debate among forensic experts both within Mexico and internationally. Many questioned the handling and preservation of the body, the differing forensic methodologies used during each examination, and whether external pressures including intense political scrutiny and overwhelming public attention might have influenced the conclusions reached by the separate investigative teams. While the conflicting forensic findings dominated public attention, investigators from the Specialized Prosecutor's Office for Femicide continued expanding their inquiry, focusing on 2 groups of people who were considered central to Debunhy's final known movements: the driver who had transported her on the night she disappeared, and the staff working at Nueva Castilla Motel during the relevant period. The driver voluntarily cooperated with investigators and gave multiple interviews to the media, consistently maintaining that he had no involvement in anything that happened after he left Debunhy by the roadside. However, Debunhy's father later revealed that prosecutors had informed him about surveillance footage that allegedly showed behavior by the driver which they considered inappropriate during the journey. The disclosure fueled further public suspicion, although there has been no public confirmation that the driver was ever formally charged in connection with Debunhy's death. A second major line of inquiry centered on Nueva Castilla Motel, particularly 2 employees working there at the time, motel manager Ana Luisa and receptionist Elida Urith. Both initially told investigators that there was no surveillance footage showing Debunhy anywhere on the motel grounds. That account changed dramatically after investigators executed search warrants at both women's homes and carried out a more comprehensive search of the motel itself. Authorities seized mobile phones, USB storage devices, and a laptop computer. Digital forensic analysis reportedly uncovered surveillance recordings clearly showing Debunhy inside the motel grounds, evidence that directly contradicted the employees' earlier statements. The discovery immediately raised serious questions about why that evidence had allegedly been withheld. Was it simply an attempt to protect the motel's reputation, or did it point to something more significant connected to what had actually happened during the time Debunhy was on the property? Investigators also broadened their review to examine other cases involving missing and murdered women in the General Escobedo area, looking for any recurring patterns that might link Debunhy's case to other crimes. Despite those efforts, authorities have not publicly established any direct connection between her case and any other investigation. Even after interviewing numerous witnesses, expanding the investigation beyond the motel, and pursuing multiple investigative leads, prosecutors were still unable to identify a specific suspect who could be directly charged over Debunhy's death. The gap between gathering numerous fragments of evidence and assembling a case strong enough to support formal criminal charges remained the greatest obstacle facing investigators throughout the years that followed. Based on evidence recovered from the seized electronic devices, the Nuevo León State Prosecutor's Office, Fiscalía General de Justicia, formally sought to bring 2 former employees of Nueva Castilla Motel before the courts. After reviewing the evidence, a local judge ruled that both Ana Luisa and Elida Urith should stand trial on allegations of concealing evidence and providing false statements to investigators. It marked the first significant legal development in the Debunhy Escobar case after months of investigation had produced few concrete results. Unlike a typical criminal arrest involving pre-trial detention, however, neither woman was remanded in custody. Instead, the court imposed strict precautionary measures. Both were prohibited from leaving the state of Nuevo León while legal proceedings remained ongoing and were ordered to report regularly to the authorities in accordance with a court-approved schedule. The judge also granted prosecutors a 3-month period to complete their investigation and finalize the prosecution's case before the matter proceeded to trial. It is important to note that, to date, these proceedings remain the only criminal prosecutions to emerge directly from the Debani Escobar investigation. The allegations against Ana Luisa and Elida Urith relate solely to the alleged concealment of evidence and false statements made to investigators. They have never been accused of directly causing Debani's death. No individual, including the driver who transported Debani on the night she disappeared, has ever been formally arrested or charged with responsibility for the circumstances that led to her death. For the Escobar family, that remains one of the most painful realities of the case. While there has been some legal action regarding the alleged concealment of evidence, accountability for what ultimately happened to Debani herself remains unresolved. Many legal observers in Mexico have argued that the contrast between prosecuting those accused of hiding evidence and identifying whoever may be responsible for Debani's death reflects a broader weakness within the country's criminal justice system. Even in cases attracting enormous public attention and sustained media scrutiny, investigations into the disappearances and deaths of women have often struggled to establish direct criminal responsibility. Throughout the years that followed, Debani's family, supported by women's rights organizations, continued to insist that prosecuting the alleged concealment of evidence was not enough. They repeatedly called on prosecutors to pursue every possible investigative lead, rule out no credible theory, and ensure that the case was not quietly allowed to fade without identifying whoever was ultimately responsible for Debani Escobar's death. As part of the legal proceedings, both Ana Luisa and Elida Urith were required to provide formal statements explaining why they had initially denied the existence of any surveillance footage showing Debani inside the grounds of Nueva Castilla Motel. According to prosecutors, the women initially claimed they had acted out of fear of the legal and professional consequences. They allegedly worried that acknowledging the existence of evidence connected to a nationally publicized missing person case would draw them directly into the investigation and severely damage both their own reputations and the business operations of the motel where they worked. Investigators, however, were not entirely satisfied with that explanation, particularly given the seriousness of the case. Follow-up questioning focused on whether anyone else, including supervisors, the motel's owners, or any third party, had pressured either woman into withholding evidence from investigators. Meanwhile, although the driver was never subjected to formal criminal proceedings, he continued to face intense scrutiny from both the media and the public. In a televised interview, he repeated the same account he had previously given investigators, insisting that he had attempted to drive Debani all the way home but that she had firmly demanded to be let out of the vehicle before reaching her destination. Investigators also re-interviewed the friends who had attended the party with Debani that night, hoping to reconstruct the final hours before she entered the vehicle. Their statements were largely consistent. They described the gathering as uneventful and reported that nothing unusual had occurred before everyone left separately. Despite collecting numerous witness statements, investigators continued to face one fundamental problem. No one had actually witnessed what happened to Debani during the critical period between the moment she disappeared from the transport company area and the time she was later captured on surveillance cameras at Nueva Castilla Motel. That absence of eyewitness testimony remained one of the greatest obstacles to advancing the case through the criminal justice system. Other motel employees who had been working at the property that night were also interviewed. Most stated that they had been completely unaware of Debani's presence on the premises until the case became national news. As a result, investigators were forced to rely overwhelmingly on digital evidence, particularly surveillance footage and electronic records, rather than direct eyewitness accounts, to reconstruct Debani Escobar's final known movements. During the 3-month period granted by the court, prosecutors focused on strengthening their case against the 2 former motel employees. Central to the prosecution was a digital forensic report verifying the authenticity of the surveillance footage recovered from the electronic devices seized during the investigation. Those recordings became one of the strongest and most difficult pieces of evidence for the defense to challenge. At the same time, the Escobar family refused to rely solely on the official investigation. Mario Escobar and Dolores Bazaldua retained additional independent forensic experts and sought assistance from international human rights organizations, hoping to maintain pressure on the authorities in Nuevo León to continue expanding the investigation rather than allowing the case to gradually fade from public attention. The case continued to attract significant international media coverage in the years that followed. Investigative reports examined the circumstances surrounding Debani's disappearance in greater depth, while HBO Max released a 4-part documentary, Who Killed Our Daughter? chronicling the Escobar family's painful pursuit of answers and accountability, largely because of the sustained attention from journalists and the public. Debunny Escobar's case never disappeared from the national conversation in the way that many other cases involving missing women in Mexico unfortunately have. Yet, despite that extraordinary level of public scrutiny, investigators have still not brought formal charges against any individual directly in connection with Debunhy's death. For the Escobar family, every newly uncovered document, every additional witness statement, and every piece of evidence represented another fragment of a much larger puzzle they were still trying to complete. But even after years of investigation, the most important piece, the one explaining exactly what happened to Debunhy, remains missing. Independent investigative journalists in Mexico have also continued examining the case, publishing new reporting about the handling of the original crime scene and highlighting potential mistakes made during the critical hours immediately after Debunhy's body was discovered. According to many legal analysts, any errors during those earlier stages of the investigation may have significantly weakened the authorities' ability to build a criminal case capable of supporting the most serious charges. The court proceedings involving the two former Nueva Castilla motel employees took place in Nuevo León, attracting considerable attention from local media, although nothing approaching the nationwide coverage that had surrounded Debunhy's disappearance in 2022. For many observers, the case represented an important test of the state's justice system, even if the proceedings were limited to allegations of concealing evidence rather than addressing Debunhy's death itself. While the legal process against the two motel employees continued, the wider question remained unanswered across Mexico. Would anyone ever stand trial for Debunhy Escobar's death? Women's rights advocates continued to reference her case during annual demonstrations against gender-based violence, particularly on anniversaries marking the date of her disappearance. Despite years of legal battles and public campaigning, the Escobar family has never stopped demanding answers. In the documentary released later about the case, viewers see Mario Escobar and Dolores Basaldúa continuing their search for the truth, holding firmly to the belief that, however long it might take, the full story would one day come to light. As of the latest publicly available information, Mexican authorities have not identified or brought to trial any individual on charges directly connected to Debunhy Escobar's death. The investigation officially remains unresolved, leaving the case among Mexico's many unsolved deaths of young women a reality that continues to weigh heavily on her family. For many people across Mexico who have followed the case for years, the initial public outrage has gradually given way to something quieter but equally painful. A lingering sense of frustration and growing doubt about whether the complete truth will ever be established. The unanswered questions surrounding Debunhy's death have become emblematic of broader concerns about the country's ability to resolve cases involving missing and murdered women, while leaving open the hope that meaningful justice may still be possible in the future. Debunhy Escobar dreamed of becoming a lawyer, someone who would fight for justice on behalf of others. Tragically, she instead became the center of one of those rare cases where justice itself seems forever out of reach. According to her family, Debunhy's bedroom in their Monterrey home has been left exactly as it was when she was still there, a quiet way for her parents to hold on to the last traces of their daughter. While time continues to pass without bringing the complete answers they have spent years searching for, 3 different autopsy reports, dozens of competing theories, thousands of hours of investigation, and yet the most fundamental question remains unanswered. What truly happened to Debunhy during those missing moments, and who, if anyone, is responsible for what happened to her? Debunhy's case has grown far beyond the story of one young woman. It has become a symbol for thousands of other women across Mexico who have disappeared, lost their lives, and never received a clear explanation or true justice. Every year, when 9 April comes around, her name is spoken once again during public demonstrations, a reminder that the fight for justice is far from over. For the Escobar family, this journey may never truly end until they receive the answers they believe their daughter deserves. Until that day comes, Debunhy's story will continue to be told not as a case that has been solved, but as a painful reminder that sometimes the truth can remain hidden, even while an entire nation watches and waits. If you've ever experienced the pain of waiting for answers after an unresolved loss, or if Debunhy's story has made you reflect on the safety of the women in your own life, we'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you'd like to follow more cases like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, so you can join us as we continue telling the stories that deserve to be remembered, until justice finally has its voice.